My name is Elizabeth Miller, but growing up everyone called me Lizzie. I grew up in the small town of Evanston, just outside of Chicago. It looked like a typical American family, the kind you see in commercials. A two-story house, a lawn, a flag on the porch, family dinners on Sundays. But if you stare at a cracked window long enough, sooner or later it shatters. My father's name was Robert Miller. He was one of those people who can't live halfway. It was all or nothing. He founded a company producing protective coatings for wood and metal, starting with a basement, old equipment, and loans that would have made anyone else nervous. But not him. He believed that one day everything would work out. My mother, Diana, was the complete opposite. She didn't work, but she always said she held the whole house together. In public, she was charming. She smiled, joked, and played the role of the perfect wife. At home, her voice became harsh, her gaze cold. And I almost always felt the cold. I had an older brother, Kevin, 6 years older. He was my mother's favorite, her pride and joy. If Kevin came home late, it was boys grow up. If he got bad grades, it was school doesn't understand him. If he lied, it was he's just sensitive. As for me, I simply existed. My father was rarely home. Sometimes he'd leave before I woke up and return when I was already asleep. When he did show up in the evening, he'd immediately lock himself in his small office, littered with papers, bills, and blueprints. My mother hated that office. She said he hid there from the family. For my 9th birthday, my father gave me a strange gift, an old video camera. Not a doll, not a bicycle, but a camera. "Film everything, Lizzie," he said, smiling slightly sheepishly. "Sometimes it's good to see life as it really is." I didn't understand those words then, but the camera became my quiet friend. I made my first serious recording when I was 10. It was a Sunday. My father promised to go to the lake with us. I'd been looking forward to it all week. But that morning his phone rang, and I knew from the look on his face that the trip was off. "Again," my mother screamed. "Do you even remember you have a family?" They were arguing in the living room. Loudly. Violently. I stood in the hallway, clutching the camera to my chest, and then turned on the recorder. They didn't see me. "I work for us," my father said wearily, almost whispering.
No, Robert.
"You work for yourself," she screamed. "I'm suffocating in this house." For the first time, I felt like our home wasn't a safe place. From then on, I filmed more and more. Not on purpose. More instinctively. My drunken mother in the kitchen late at night. A broken plate. Kevin slamming the door. A silence that was sometimes more terrifying than screams. And then came the day that changed our lives forever. I was 11. I was sitting in my room, reviewing old videos, when I heard the front door slam. My father's footsteps were heavy, sharp. His voice echoed through the house. "Diana, come down immediately." I took the camera and quietly walked out into the hallway. He held an envelope in his hands. The papers trembled. My mother came down slowly, as if she already knew what was coming. "Explain," he said. "Just explain." She looked at him and smiled. Not scared. Relieved. "Do you want the truth?" she said. "I cheated on you. More than once. And you know what? I don't regret it." I almost dropped the camera. He didn't scream. He just sat down. It was as if everything had been taken out of him at once. That conversation lasted a long time. A very long time. I wrote it all down. Every word. Every blow to the remnants of the family. A month later, they announced their divorce. The decision was simple. I would stay with my father, Kevin with my mother. That day, when Mom was packing, she didn't even hug me. "You were always by his side," she said coldly. I watched her go through the camera lens and understood for the first time. Sometimes parents, too, are gone forever, even if they're still alive. Thus ended my childhood illusion of family. And a story began that I didn't yet know the full story. After the divorce, our world shrank to 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen, and a view of the brick wall of the neighboring house. My father and I moved to a small apartment on the south side of Evanston, cheap but clean. There was no creaking of old floors, no mom's harsh voice, no feeling of being in the way all the time. And yet, at first it was hard. My father seemed to have aged 10 years in a single month. He became quieter, more cautious, as if afraid to upset the delicate balance that had only just begun to be established between us. In the evenings, he often sat at the kitchen table, staring at bills. I pretended to do my homework, but in reality, I was watching him from under my eyelashes. Sometimes he caught my eye and tried to smile. "Everything will be fine, Lizzie," he said. "It just takes a little time." I nodded, though I wasn't sure. Money was tight. My father's company was running on his word, and a few regular customers. He worked even harder than before. I learned to cook simple things: pasta, omelets, soup from a can. For the first time, silence appeared in our house, but it wasn't empty silence. It wasn't oppressive. It was healing. Mom hardly called. Occasionally, short messages arrived. "How are you?" I didn't answer. Not out of anger. I just didn't know what to say. Kevin disappeared from my life as if he'd never existed. I saw him once from a distance at the mall. He was walking next to my mother, laughing. They didn't notice me, so I didn't approach him. School became my refuge. I was a good student, not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because it was the only thing I could control. After school, I worked part-time at a small bookstore. The owner, Mrs. Brown, often said, "You have intelligent eyes, Elizabeth. You'll go far." My father was proud of me, but he didn't mince words. He wasn't good at communicating feelings. But one day, when he returned late at night, he placed a new hard drive on my desk. "For your notes," he said. "Don't throw away the past. It will come in handy someday." I didn't realize then how right he was. Almost 6 years passed. I was 17 when Claire came into our lives. She arrived unexpectedly, literally knocking on the door. I opened it and saw a woman of about 35, wearing a formal coat, with a confident gaze and a warm smile. "You must be Elizabeth," she said.
I'm Claire Wilson.
"Your father told me a lot about you." My father came out of the kitchen and froze. And then, for the first time in a long time, I saw something resembling embarrassment on his face. Claire turned out to be a business consultant. My father's company had hired her to save their manufacturing plant from bankruptcy. She was unlike my mother, both in appearance and in spirit. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make sarcastic remarks.
She didn't look down on me.
On the contrary, she listened. For the first few weeks, I was wary of her. Experience had taught me not to trust grown women who find themselves too close to my father. But Claire didn't try to mother me. She was simply there. Sometimes the 3 of us would have dinner in the kitchen. She and my father would discuss numbers, strategies, plans. They would argue, but calmly, respectfully. And every argument ended not with slamming doors, but with laughter. I watched them and caught myself thinking, this is probably what a normal family should be like. The business slowly began to improve. Claire helped find investors, renegotiate contracts, and enter new markets. My father began to believe in himself again. He began to stand up straighter, laugh, even joke. One day, I heard him say to her, "If only you had come earlier." He didn't finish, and she didn't ask for more. I went to the University of Chicago. I studied economics. My father insisted that I live in the dorms, so you could have your own life. But I came home every weekend. Claire was already living with us. I didn't feel jealous, only gratitude. By then, my father's company was already firmly established. Not a giant, but a solid business. And I increasingly found myself thinking that I wanted to be a part of it. One day at dinner, I said, "After graduation, I want to work with you." My father looked up at me, his eyes full of pride. I would love that more than anything in the world. Claire smiled. So there will be 3 of us. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer that little girl with a camera in her hand, hiding in the hallway. I had become part of something real. Something built not on lies, but on choice. I didn't yet know how high we would rise, or how painful the fall would be. By the time I graduated from university, my father's company no longer resembled that fragile business teetering on the brink of collapse. Miller Protective Solutions was firmly on its feet. We had contracts with major developers, warehouses in 2 states, and a reputation for honesty, both in terms of clients and employees. I officially joined as an analyst. In reality, I did everything from spreadsheets and forecasts to negotiations with suppliers. My father never cut me any slack. In business, there's no such thing as daughter or father, he said on my first day. There's only responsibility. Claire worked alongside him, but never pushed ahead. They were partners not on paper but in essence. Sometimes I caught their glances across the negotiating table and realized they had something my parents never had: respect. Several years passed. I was 26 when the business literally exploded. We launched a new line of eco-friendly coatings, an idea my father had been toying with for a long time but was afraid to take the risk. Claire insisted. "Either we grow now or we'll be overtaken," she said then. She was right. Contracts poured in one after another. My father flew around the country holding meetings, signing agreements. Sometimes he'd call me late at night from the hotel. "Lizzie, you should have seen their faces when I showed him the numbers." He was happy. Genuinely happy. That's when he started talking about things he'd never brought up before. "Life's too short to be afraid all the time," he said one dinner. "I've denied myself everything for so many years. I don't want it anymore." I didn't pay attention to those words. I shouldn't have. One day, he came home with a gleam in his eyes, like a boy's. "I've signed up for an extreme jump," he announced. "What?" Claire and I said simultaneously. "A jump from a height. It's all official with instructors. It's safe." He waved it off. "I've been afraid of heights my whole life. It's time to stop." We tried to persuade him. We laughed, we got angry, we argued. But he was adamant. "I've taken so many risks in business," he said. "Can I take a risk for myself?" The day of the jump was sunny. I didn't go. I had a meeting with investors. Claire went with him. Before we left, he hugged me. "I'll come back a hero," he winked. The phone rang that afternoon. I remember everything down to the smallest detail: the sound of the air conditioner, the coffee on the table, my own breathing. The voice on the other end was strange, official. "There was an incident. Heart attack." "We're so sorry." I didn't scream. I just sat on the floor. Claire returned late that evening. Silent. With a blank stare. When she dropped the mug in the kitchen and it shattered, the sound seemed unreal to me. My father was dead. The funeral became an event. People I'd never even known existed came up, shook his hand, and told me what a man he was. I held on. So did Claire. And then I heard a familiar voice. "Well," Mom said, "the end of an era." I turned around. She was standing there in a black dress, clearly drunk. Kevin was next to her. Strong, angry, alien. Do you even realize where you are? I hissed. I'm at my husband's funeral, she chuckled. Or, am I no longer allowed to? I didn't answer. But when she started speaking louder, accusing Claire of getting it all done, I couldn't stand it. Go away, I said. Right now. People were watching. Some were whispering. Mom laughed. We'll meet again. At the reading of the will. And she was right. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in the lawyer's office. Me, Claire, Mom, and Kevin. The air was heavy. The lawyer read dryly, without emotion. All property, including Miller Protective Solutions, is transferred to my daughter, Elizabeth Miller. I felt my head spin. To my ex-wife, Diane Miller, and my son, Kevin Miller, $25,000 each. There was silence. And then an explosion. That's impossible, Mom screamed. This is MY Company. Kevin looked at me with hatred. I tried to speak calmly. Dad had it all figured out beforehand. You manipulated him, she screamed. And you, she pointed a finger at Claire. You completely destroyed our family. I stood up. If it makes you feel better, I said, I'm willing to give you $100,000, just so we can part ways peacefully. Mom laughed.
No.
I'll sue, and I'll take everything. At that moment, I realized this was just the beginning. The lawsuit arrived 3 weeks after the will was read. A thick envelope with official seals, which gave me a sinking feeling in my chest. Mom demanded that the will be declared invalid, that control of the company be transferred to her, and that she be compensated for emotional damages. The language was pompous, but the gist was simple. She wanted everything. Claire read the papers silently, then carefully folded them and said, We can handle this. I nodded, but I couldn't sleep that night. One thought kept running through my head. How did it happen that the toughest fight in my life was with my own mother? The lawyers worked efficiently. The will was flawlessly drawn up. My father had thought everything through, but Mom wasn't about to give in. A month later, she filed an additional lawsuit, this time against Claire. The accusations sounded both absurd and disgusting. Marriage destruction and a self-serving relationship. She claimed that Claire had been her father's mistress even before the divorce and had deliberately manipulated him for money. When I heard this, I felt physically ill. It's a lie, I told the lawyer. A complete lie. We'll prove it, he replied calmly. But get ready. It's going to be messy.
He turned out to be right.
The court hearings dragged on for months. Cameras, journalists, local news headlines. Family drama surrounding a successful company, daughter versus mother. I try not to read them, but I still saw them. Claire was remarkably steadfast. Only sometimes, late at night, when we were alone in the office, did I notice her hands shaking. I'm sorry, I said. It's all my fault. She always answered the same way. No, Elizabeth. It's because of her choice. I remember the day of my court appearance all too well. The cold courtroom, the wooden benches, my mother's heavy gaze. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. I walked up to the stand. Tell the truth, the judge said. I took a deep breath. I have evidence that refutes my mother's claims. The lawyer handed over the video recordings to the court. My old archive. That very same camera. When they played the first recording, the courtroom fell silent. My mother's voice, drunken and harsh, was clear. I cheated on you, Robert. For years. And I don't regret it. I didn't look at her. I looked at the judge. Entry after entry.
Dates.
Context. Then a private report from the detective my father hired before the divorce, but never used against her. These materials confirm, I said, that the marriage wasn't destroyed because of Claire Wilson. All the accusations against her are false. Mom jumped up. She's lying, she screamed. This is a setup. The judge banged his gavel. Silence. The verdict was harsh and unequivocal. Mom's lawsuit was dismissed. All legal costs are hers to bear. The case against Claire is dismissed. But Mom didn't stop. She screamed. She insulted me. She accused me of betrayal. The judge issued a warning, then another, and ultimately found her guilty of contempt of court. As she was let out, she turned to me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll do everything I can to make sure you're left with nothing." I didn't answer. I thought this was the end. I was wrong. A few days later, Claire ran into my office, her face pale. "Look," she said, handing over the phone. Mom's social media was filled with posts. Miller Company in debt. Elizabeth plotting an escape with the money. Insiders confirm fraud. It was outright slander. We worked for 2 days without sleep. Lawyers, press releases, meetings with key partners. For the first time, I felt real fear. Not for myself, but for my father's business. His legacy. We sent a formal cease and desist letter, threatening a new lawsuit. And for the first time, she backed down. A short post of apology appeared on her page. Cold, formal, but sufficient. When I closed the laptop, my hands were shaking. "Is it over?" I asked. Claire looked at me long and hard. "No," she said. But we held on. And in that moment, I realized I'm no longer the girl who hid behind the camera. I can stand my ground, even if it's my own mother who's up against me. After Mom publicly retracted her statements, a strange, almost frightening calm fell over our lives. It was as if a storm had passed, but the air was still electric. The company gradually returned to its usual rhythm: meetings, contracts, reports, new projects. Employees were smiling again. Partners stopped asking questions with wariness in their voices. On the outside, everything looked stable. On the inside, it wasn't. I lived in constant anticipation of the next blow. Every call from an unfamiliar number made my heart clench. I caught myself checking my mother's social media, even though I knew I shouldn't. The past wouldn't let go. Claire saw this. "You don't have to carry everything on your own," she said one evening when we were alone in the office. "You have the right to just live." I nodded, but didn't answer. Living, that was something I still had to learn. We were immersed in work. The launch of the new eco-friendly coating was going better than expected. We were negotiating a plant in Indiana, expanding our workforce, and implementing employee support programs. I increasingly caught myself thinking that this was exactly how my father envisioned the company's future, not just profit, but values. Almost 2 months of relative calm passed. That evening was ordinary. I stayed late at work, finishing a report for the board of directors. Autumn had already arrived. Chill air, yellow leaves, long shadows on the pavement. By the time I stepped out into the parking lot, the sun had almost set. I was already reaching for my keys when I heard a voice behind me that made my stomach clench. "Elizabeth." I turned around. She was standing under a lamppost. My mother. I hadn't seen her for months, but she had changed. Haggard, in a worn coat, without her usual makeup and confident posture. For the first time, she looked not menacing but lost. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my distance. She hesitated. "I've been thinking a lot. About your offer. About the money." I exhaled slowly. "This is it. What I've been waiting for." My offer is no longer valid, I said calmly. She winced, as if she hadn't expected a refusal. Listen, her voice grew sharper. I just need the money. I'll leave. Disappear from your life. Don't you want that? I looked at her and suddenly realized I no longer felt either fear or guilt. Only fatigue. You've already tried to ruin my life, I replied. And my father's business. There will be no second chance. She took a step forward. I'm your mother, she screamed. I sacrificed everything for you.
No, y interrupted.
You sacrificed me for yourself. The words hung in the air. She began to speak, loudly, haltingly, accusingly, recalling her childhood, telling how hard it had been for her, how she had been betrayed. Before, those words would have broken me, but not now. If you show up here again, I said quietly, or try to harm the company again, I will sue. And I will win. This is not a threat. It's a fact. She fell silent. I got into the car and drove away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, her figure grew smaller and smaller until it vanished into the darkness. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept without troubled dreams. The next day, Claire and I signed the documents to launch a new plant. A week later, we signed the documents to create a scholarship program for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. We named it after my father. A photograph of Robert Miller hung in the conference room. Sometimes I felt like he was watching us, silently approving. I never looked back, because I realized the most important thing. Family isn't the one who demands. Family is the one who stays. Almost a year had passed since that meeting in the parking lot. A year without scandals, without lawsuits, without attempts to bring back the past. For the first time in a long time, life became smooth, not perfect, but real. I learned to wake up without anxiety and go to sleep without the feeling that tomorrow something would surely fall apart. The company was growing. The new Indiana plant was up and running faster than we expected. The eco-friendly line became the brand's flagship. We received a national award for sustainable business development. I stood on stage holding the statuette, and I thought not about the money or the recognition. I thought about my father, about how he once stood in the garage among the paint cans and told us that one day everything would work out. Now it has. I officially took the position of CEO. It wasn't an easy decision. Sometimes I doubted whether I had the right. But every time I doubted it, I remembered his words. Responsibility is not a privilege, it's a choice. Claire became my partner not only in business, but in life. We never called each other mother and daughter. We didn't need to. We were a family without labels. Sometimes in the evenings we would sit in the kitchen, drink tea, and talk about the future.
Calmly.
Without shouting. Without fear. One day, I found that very camera. It was lying in my desk drawer. Old, heavy, with worn buttons. I held it in my hands for a long time, then turned it on. The recordings were there. Everything. Childhood, screams, divorce, the truth. I thought these videos were weapons. But now I realized they were just history. My history. I saved the archive in a locked storage unit and, for the first time, felt no pain. I never saw my mother again. Sometimes I heard rumors. Some said she'd moved to another state, others that she was living with distant relatives. Kevin, too, had disappeared from my life completely. It used to hurt. Now it doesn't. I've accepted that not all stories have a happy ending. But mine did. On the anniversary of my father's death, Claire and I went to the cemetery. It was quiet. The autumn wind rustled the leaves. I laid out the flowers and stood in silence for a long time. "You be proud," I finally said. I hope so. I didn't need an answer. A few months later, we opened a fund to support young entrepreneurs. At the opening, a student approached me and said, "If it weren't for your scholarship, I would have dropped out." I smiled and suddenly felt the circle close. My father built a business. I built a continuation. One evening, I returned home later than usual. The lights were out in the office, and the city outside was living its own life. I went to the window and looked down. Before, I would have felt emptiness. Now I feel confidence. I'm no longer that girl with a camera in her hand, hiding in the hallway. I'm a woman who made a choice, who didn't let the past destroy the future, who understood that love isn't an obligation but an action. Family isn't blood. Family is respect. Family is those who remain when everything falls apart. And if someone asked me what I inherited from my father, I wouldn't say the company or money. I inherited the strength to be myself.